Okay, so today's video is going to be a little bit longer than I usually make them. That is because I have to discuss several concepts I have been going through for not very long, the past few days perhaps, and most of them are related to concepts regarding morality. And I have been fascinated by the different approaches to the nature of morality that have been carried out by various people and various schools of thought. So I'm going to start on a very fundamental level, and then we are going to scale up gradually until we reach the optimum level of what I could call it, which is the metaphysical arguments. Okay, so let's start with the fundamentals. Now, to many of us, it's pretty clear things, whether they are moral or whether they are immoral. At least that's what it seems to be on the surface. But I want to argue that we don't really know what is right and what is wrong. Now, this is a very flawed position to have. At least it seems that it is very flawed, because obviously some things are right and some things are wrong. Murdering your entire family is wrong. At least that's what a sane person would think. But that is a very specific situational example. I want to start out with the premise that there are always moral disagreements. There are always moral dilemmas that cannot be conquered with a single school of thought. And a very famous example of this is the trolley problem, which is mostly a huge debate between utilitarianism and various other principles of human welfare. So, there are moral disagreements. Therefore, we can find it fair to conclude that there are no objective facts. Now, how do I arrive at this conclusion? So, let's take taste. If someone likes a food and someone doesn't like another food, there is going to be a disagreement, and that disagreement will not be resolved through further analysis or an objective operation. That disagreement will remain because taste is something which is very inherent to us. So if I like to eat apples and someone else doesn't like the taste of apples, I have no right to prove that apples are tasty when that someone clearly doesn't enjoy the taste. So that means my disagreement with the person regarding the taste of apples will remain perpetual. So this disagreement will remain perpetual, and the only way we can stop this disagreement and say that the only way we can arrive at a conclusion from this disagreement is to say that there is no objective taste of the apple. Therefore, there is no objective reality to which we claim to attain our experiential beliefs from. Therefore, I acknowledge that there is no objective fact to be established here. So can we do the same for morality? The answer seems yes, right? Because if there are perpetual disagreements, we can obviously go ahead and say that some things are just out of scope of morality and cannot come under the criteria of morality. But here is where a contradiction comes in. And I want to prove this by an analogy. Take the existence of God. Now, this is a very, very debated argument, and this has been the subject of discussions and debates for more than a millennia now. More than a millennium. And here, I cannot conclude just because it's a perpetual moral disagreement, I cannot conclude that there are no objective facts. Because here, a rational person like you and me and everyone would think that there are two possible cases. Either there is a God, which we define as someone who is omnipotent, omniscient, benevolent, and everything else, or there isn't. The disagreement doesn't dispute the claim that no reality exists in itself. So that means that to say that if something is perpetually disagreeable, no moral objective facts exist is not entirely true. So now I want to move on to objectivism. So now that we have drafted the fact that we can't claim things aren't objective, let's make some laws. Let's make some moral grounds upon which humanity should stand. Now the problem with that is whenever you try to make a law regarding morality, it is almost always conquered by a situational exception. So laws are inadequate because of situational differences. And now the only way to overcome these situational differences is by consistently amending those laws. So if I say that stealing is bad, I still would find a situation where stealing is perhaps good. That might be a very, very rare situation. That might be a situation you don't see in an ordinary course of day, or it can be a common situation too. But I am pretty likely to find a situation where which contradicts my moral authority to say that stealing is wrong. So therefore, can we say that we can't establish any moral laws? Well, maybe this argument works, but it doesn't work all the way to the end, because I can now, as a moral objectivist, say that okay, fine, my law regarding stealing is wrong wasn't perfect, but I can amend it. Because I found a situation that contradicts my law, now I can amend my law and make it so that the contradiction is impossible. And by finding more and more such situations, I can amend my laws consistently. But the problem with that argument is that now I go to incredible lengths to just update my laws unendingly. And what I end up doing is defining the world. Because let's say I say something, I find a situation that contradicts something, then I amend my saying and include that situation. So I'm ultimately being all inclusive in the end. So I end up defining the world. And if we go over all the possible permutations and combinations, we end up defining our existence. And again, there are situations where there exists no objective right or wrong, or even no definition of right or wrong in itself. Sometimes there are situations in life where no right or no wrong can exist. There is just a wrong and a less wrong, or a right or a less right. So I think that sums up our attempts at moral objectivism. So that means morality cannot be confined to objectivity, and we cannot be objective regarding our claims and laws to morality. So now what does that leave us with? That leaves us with the premise that morality is relative. So now I'm going to jump upon relativism as an attribute given to morality. So now that we have kind of established that it is pretty difficult to objectively classify morality and laws pertaining morality, we can say that morality varies. Now, how does it vary? It varies from person to person. It varies from a social group to a social group. It varies from a construct to another construct. It varies from situation to situation. Moral relativism is again based on the premise that there are perpetual moral disagreements. And the thing is, I found a very good definition of relativism in Stanford's encyclopedia, which says, now listen to this very carefully, because I might not be able to repeat it since it's so long, but if you listen to it carefully, it's a very, very well written definition regarding relativism. So here's what Stanford has to say. Relativism, roughly put, is the view that truth or falsity, right and wrong, standards of reasoning and procedures of justifications are product of differing conventions and frameworks of assessment, and that their authority is confined to the context giving rise to them. More precisely, relativism covers views which maintain that, at a high level of abstraction, at least some class of things have the properties they have. Example, beautiful, morally good, epistemically justified, not simpliciter, but only relative to a given framework of assessment. And correspondingly, that the truth of claims attributing these properties holds only once the relevant framework of assessment is specified or supplied. Relativists characteristically insist, relativists characteristically insist furthermore that if something is only relatively so, then there can be no framework independent vantage point from which the matter of whether the thing in question is so can be established. So this is the basis of relativism as a school of thought. Relativism seems pretty convincing. At its core, moral relativism says that morality can mean different things to different people. So different groups can have their own definition of morality, and none of those groups are wrong. So now let's travel into a small intricate part of moral relativism, which Bernard Williams famously likes to call vulgar relativism. Now I'm going to lay out the conditions for vulgar relativism, and you tell me if it's not convincing. So, vulgar relativism starts with the concept of relativism, saying that morality means different things to different people and none of those people are wrong. This is the first premise of vulgar relativism. The second premise, and now you have to judge whether it's right or wrong, is toleration. It says that while all groups in their own understandings of morality are right in themselves, they have no right to interfere with the belief systems of another group since the other group is also right in their beliefs. I think both of these things together sound perfectly convincing, because we have already established that morality differentiates itself from situation to situation, from person to person, from life to life. I think the first part of vulgar relativism, which is relativism, is pretty clear. And toleration should also be accepted, because if I am right and someone else is right, I have no right to impose my idea of what is good and what is bad on the other person, since he's as right as I am. But Bernard Williams managed to point out a very, very fundamental flaw in the idea of vulgar relativism. So, here is the problem. Relativism and toleration are in themselves incompatible. Now, before I present his views through my words, I would like to quote his words, which I have right here, and what he says. So William says, the central confusion of relativism is to try to conjure out of the fact that societies have differing attitudes and values a priori non-relative principle to determine the attitude of one society to another. This is impossible. If we are going to say that there are ultimate moral disagreements between societies, we must include in the matters they can disagree about their attitudes to moral outlooks. So he says that relativism does not go hand in glove with toleration. And why is that? Because in relativism, the fundamental argument is that all societies are correct and there is no single law governing the morality for all those societies. Then why the hell does toleration act as an arbitrary rule over all societies that you have no right to interfere with other societies? Because let's say I have a society which, according to relativism, whatever my moral grounds are perfectly fine and I am perfectly okay. But one of my moral values is to interfere with other societies. Now, if I follow relativism, I am right. But I am also wrong. This creates a paradox because toleration does not find me right in what I am doing, but relativism does. So, vulgar relativism in its truest essence cannot exist. Therefore, it is important to point out how moral relativism also fails. You just need one society, and there are many, but you just need one group of people who think that they have the right to interfere with the beliefs of other groups of people. And there you have it. You have crushed the concept of vulgar relativism down to its core. So, these things are why morality is pretty absurd to think about. While doing some research, I caught some glimpses of Kant's grounding for the metaphysics of morals, of the summary of which I read pretty thoroughly. However thoroughly you can read a summary, but it had some pretty good stuff to consider while pondering upon the question of morality, which is freedom of the will. Before I give you this paragraph, I must give you the precursor to this paragraph. Okay, so the argument so far has established what the moral law is, but has not demonstrated why we feel we should be moral. This is what Kant wrote, okay, and these are not his exact words, but these are boiled down. The basis for morality is the concept of freedom. Freedom is the ability to give you your own law to your will. When we follow the demands of some need, desire, or circumstance, we are in state of heteronomy. Our will is determined by something outside of ourselves. When we follow the categorical imperative and choose maxims that could be universal laws, we are in state of autonomy. So Kant, by his entire work, proves that to be in the state of complete autonomy, you need to follow categorical imperatives. Now, what the hell are categorical imperatives? Of course, I cannot get into those in this video because that can take up 1, 2, 3 or maybe 10 videos in themselves. But the fundamental argument that Kant makes is that when we submit ourselves to a desire, a situation, an occasion, or a characteristic of nature defining our actions, we are subjugating our freedom and are under a state of what he calls a heteronomy. So to obtain an autonomy, we must have a set of objective laws from which we are the sole beings who can choose from and choose to act upon those laws without being interfered or without being influenced by the forces of nature, and therefore ultimately submitting our freedom. Now, these are all the various aspects of, well, not all, but most of the aspects of the nature of morality which I discovered over the past few days. And of course, this is a very narrowed down version of whatever there is to be explored, but I think this at least proves a point that morality can be approached through many different angles. So if you try to be objective about it, the relativists come and batter you to death. If you try to be relative about it, then people like Bernard Williams come and, crush your arguments to dust. And while being both objective and subjective regarding morality, you still give more power to the moral skepticists, because they believe that morality isn't guided by reason in itself. And we end up supporting the moral skeptics who argue against morality, having reason as a precursor. So, where do I get with this? Honestly, I don't know. But morality in itself is not a very, it's a very abstract concept, to be honest. And all the arguments related to morality will ultimately be dependent on what your definition of morality itself is. But for the time being, I think that morality has a multi-angled nature. It can be approached from many sides, and however, I do find myself inclined towards the relativist side of morality. Now, I will have to go through Kant's works. Maybe he'll convince me otherwise, but until then, I find myself to be a moral relativist, at least with regards to the truest concepts of morality. So that's it for this video, and this was a pretty long video, but I think it will help me store a greater amount of information. So yeah.